Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Books and Mortar with me, your host Rizia, where we talk about the books that build us. This particular episode focuses on a review of a book called Onion Tears by Shubnum Khan. So this is the first time I have read a book by a South African Indian female Muslim author. That's quite a list of labels, and believe me, each of them is a full identity in and of itself. And being at the crossway of all four, I think gives you a rather unique voice. And it's this that made me pick this book up, the fact that I sit at the same crossroads. So I'm going to read the blurb from the back of the book, just to give you an idea of what it's about. So here goes. Love, loss, and life are the themes that weave through this tale of 3 generations of Muslim women living in suburban South Africa. Khadija Bibi Balam is a hard-working and stubborn first-generation Indian who longs for her beloved homeland and often questions what she is doing on the tip of Africa. At 37, her daughter Sumaya is struggling to reconcile her South African and Indian identities, while Sumaya's own daughter, 11-year-old Anisa, is a girl who has some difficult questions of her own. Is her mother lying to her about her father's death? Why won't she tell her what really happened? Gradually, the past merges with the present as the novel meanders through their lives, uncovering the secrets people keep, the words they swallow, and the emotions they elect to mute. For this family, faintly detectable through the sharp, spicy aromas that find their way out of Khadija's kitchen, the scent of tragedy is always threatening. Eventually, it will bring this family together. If not, it will tear them apart. So there are some mild spoilers in this review. You have been warned. This book is completely character-driven, and as the blurb says, it's a meander. There's not much plot. And the development of these characters is really the core of the book. So if you enjoy reading books where something happens, this is not the book for you because really nothing really happens. It's very, very much character driven. It focuses on 3 generations of Muslim women, of whom Khadija, I think, was the most interesting for me. I think because she was the oldest of the 3, she was the most developed. She also had really strong opinions, and she exuded the kind of wisdom that I think people collect through a lifetime of difficulties. She reminded me strongly of my paternal grandmother while I was reading about her, moving around in the kitchen, making samosas, cleaning and roasting her own spices, and, scolding those who don't, buying her dhania or her coriander from the guy who comes to the door, and also keeping up with all of the neighborhood gossip. So beyond the daily drudge that involved very specific, gender-specific roles, Khadija was also a strong, no-nonsense, ever-enduring woman who could only really be pushed around by her husband, I think. Khadija's dialect was an interesting mix of English, Urdu, and Afrikaans, right, which made me smile because my grandmother was the same, except she spoke Gujarati instead of Urdu. So the language that you speak is usually an indication of the region in India that your family is from. The Afrikaans was very likely because of apartheid in South Africa, where the language of the political leadership was Afrikaans, and it was also compulsory learning in schools. For some reason, it still is. English is the legacy of British rule, and this triad of languages that's spoken by a single person, sometimes all in the same sentence, really speaks to the rich history of South Africa and also about the eras through which Khadija lived, that explains so much of the way she is. So her attitude towards white people and thinking of herself as almost an entirely different species was especially interesting to me because she mentions that amongst her own people, she felt that she always had the answers to all of their questions. But when it came to white people, she just had no idea what to say to them or how to react to them when they spoke to her. So she just kind of retreated into her shell, and she became the quiet, timid, old Indian woman that she was so sure they thought she was. So there's definitely a comfort level with her own kind that is, I think, partly human nature, but also a legacy of apartheid and likely of the Group Areas Act, where people of the same race were forced to live in the same area. So to Khadija, her own kind means Indian Muslims and not immigrants from Pakistan, because you just can't trust them. So there was actually a section in this book, right, where they're talking about the different kinds of Muslims, and this resonated with me because these are conversations that I have heard through my lifetime as well, right? So here it goes. starting off on, this is page 72 of the book. This was the same girl they were trying to find a Memon boy for. They turned down our Iqbal who went to propose, Khadija said. Same girl, huh? Memon. Now they didn't even get Memon or Surti, they got a Pakistani, spat Amina. See, why are they so fussy for Memon? Muslim is Muslim. Now see, they're paying for being fussy. I always said after Abba turned away those boys because they weren't Miabai, that I would never be fussy for my own children. What's so great about Miabai or Surti? Look at Harun. Abba made me marry him, but look how he turned out to be. Khadija said agitatedly as she chopped thick onion rings. The other sisters became quiet. They never knew whether to talk about Harun or not. Khadija continued, That's why when my Naeem brought that Urdu one, I said, why not? Muslim is Muslim, no? Khadija waved her knife in the air to emphasize her point. Even when Sumaya brought that fellow, I said, why not? See, Zubaida Bibi was being so fussy for a member, now they are paying the price. Yeah, but then Pakistani is also Muslim, countered Aisha. Yeah, maar, Khadija paused. They're not our type. Really, Aisha, you know what I'm saying. They're different. They have their own ways. And they clean and they always with the illegal thing, selling fake DVDs and making gangs. And they steal our girls. Both shady, she paused. Indian is also Indian, she concluded. They have to make a living, Aisha said confidently. Some of them got honest jobs. Abba saw things were better here and didn't he come here? We also live here. Those Pakis saw things are better here and they also came away. And what if they got good business and clean, then what's so wrong with them? Arifa Begum's daughter got married to one. They say she's happy. Times are changing now. Aye, Pakis will always be dirty to me, retorted Khadija, ending the conversation with a thud as she sliced the head off the fish. Khadija cut the fish into pieces and rinsed them in a dish. Sometimes her sisters just didn't understand her. These Pakis were different from them. So yes, they were Muslim, but they had different ways. Indians had their own ways and Pakistanis had their own ways, and that was that. Indians had a dusty, dirty way, but Pakistanis had a grimy, dirty way. That's how she made the differentiation in her head. There was a distinct difference of dirtiness between people. The word Paki even stuck on her tongue. She couldn't accept anyone who was different from her. God made people different for a reason. So, there's offensive language in this section, right? I mean, we don't use words like that to describe people. So Surti Memon and Miyabais that she's talking about, it refers to the groups of Muslims that largely indicates the part of India that your ancestors are from and also what language you speak. So there's this wide belief that you should marry your own kind. So Surtis should marry Surtis, Memon should marry Memons, Miyabais should marry Miyabais. But it's not a guarantee of happiness in your life, you know. So Khadija is saying that it shouldn't matter what group of Muslim you marry into because essentially Muslim is Muslim. But she then goes on to contradict herself really badly because while she says Muslim is Muslim, she means that Indian Muslims are okay, but Pakistani Muslims are not okay. So, and I'm sorry to say that these views are still pretty rife within our community. Hey, it's terrible. It's not great. Khadija had a life that was really smattered with tragedy, trauma, and disappointment. But as hard as a woman that these experiences have made her, she was also very sweet. She was very soft. She had a sweet friendship with a colored lady who stayed next door with her father and her child. She also has a soft spot for blue-collar workers, and she helped out a young girl who was being abused by her husband. So she taught the girl to cook a few dishes, and she told her to have the food ready when her husband comes home from work, because a man who has a full stomach won't have the energy to lift his hand to his wife. Which is very interesting advice. So there's a very prevalent theme of cooking in Khadija's sections and the pride that Khadija takes in her food. So it's very important to her that she's able to make the best mango pickle or the best biryani because it makes her the envy of other women. And Indian women are very secretive about their recipes. And sometimes, as Khadija mentions, they will give you the wrong recipe deliberately so that the praise can continue to be theirs. I think that the women of Khadija's generation didn't have a lot of choices. They also didn't have a voice or a power of their own, or that they didn't embrace their own power. They were never taught to do it or encouraged to do it, and they never had the courage to do it. So the only place where they were absolutely in charge was in their kitchen. So I think that they really embraced this, and they placed a lot of their value in how much people enjoyed the food that they cooked. So their personal value was related to how other people saw their food. So Khadija says that she puts a bit of herself into every meal, and if you know her food, you know her, which is a very powerful thing to say, hey? And it means that food also has a very, very strong emotional component for her. So obviously, since her generation, it's now more common for women to work. Although sadly, the kitchen still largely remains a woman's domain, and it's just taken for granted that it is. I'm hoping that we don't place so much of our personal value in our prowess at domestic tasks as women, because really we're more than that, right? So food plays a very big role in Indian culture, and especially so amongst the Muslim Indians. Every gathering has a meal or snacks, and it's very rare that you would go to an Indian person's house and not be offered, but honestly more like forced to have something to eat and drink. And you will also likely end up going home with a parcel of food as well. So offering food, I think it's a way of welcoming someone into your home, and I think sharing a little bit of what you have with them, which is really a lovely sentiment. I'm just not competing with my friends over who makes the best chicken curry in the complex, you know. So interestingly, this young girl that Khadija helped, she told her that if the food solution doesn't work, she should learn a skill and leave her husband. So I found this very interesting because it's not common to find Indian women who would encourage divorce. But I think it stemmed from her powerful point that women have historically and continue to be the ones who are expected to make the sacrifices in life and in relationships. She tells this girl, we must make the sacrifices. Nah? It's always the woman who must make it. Otherwise, no one will end up making the sacrifice and we will all end up killing each other. So that's Khadija. Sumaya is the younger of Khadija's two children. She's a 37-year-old single mother, and she works at a travel agency. Khadija wanted her to become a doctor, obviously, because, then you're set for life. So, but that didn't quite work out for Sumaya. She keeps her hair short, which really just shrouds her in scandal and general otherness. So it makes her the subject of a lot of gossip and speculation amongst the community. One of the aunties says that she was always different from the other children and that Sumaya actually made her feel uncomfortable. She had an older brother who was favored by her father in every way, so that eventually she had no love left for her father. And that's something that really makes you wonder what her future relationships with men are going to be like. Because your first relationship with a man is the relationship with your dad, right? She never seemed to be one, though, who was much interested in boys, and she was always very different to her peers. So her looks are actually mentioned a lot in the book, and it seems to be something that sets her apart. She's not described as being traditionally pretty or beautiful, but that there's something about her features that's striking. So Sumaya goes through some really traumatic experiences in her life, and although one is given preference in the story over the other. And in spite of these really life-changing things that happened to her, there's never mention of her going to counseling or undergoing any kind of emotional therapy. Indians don't generally hold with such things, and there's a lot of stigma around mental health issues. If you say that you're depressed or that you're feeling down, often other Muslims will tell you that you need to pray more and you'll feel better. So mental health issues go largely ignored until that person really reaches a breaking point. So Sumaya seems to be a very passionate person, and she feels things very deeply. So her reactions are then correspondingly also quite large. So the book revolves around an incident in Sumaya's life with her husband, which then leaves her in a state of deep depression, which they refer to throughout the book as her dark days. So this again made her the subject of a lot of gossip and speculation about why her husband was gone. Speculation, which in a lot of cases eventually somehow became fact, right? So Sumaya and her mother tend to disagree on a lot of things, menial things, but I also think it's because Khadija doesn't explain herself properly. She keeps a lot of things from Sumaya, and she will tell her to do things, or she will reprimand her for not doing things a certain way. But then flashbacks into Khadija's past gives you as the reader an understanding of why she is the way she is and why she wants Sumaya to do things a certain way. But she never tells Sumaya about it, which really doesn't surprise me, because communication and expressing emotions or thoughts has never really been a strength of Indian parents. And sadly, Sumaya then perpetuates the cycle with her daughter Anisa, right? So Anisa is Sumaya's 11-year-old daughter. She's in the tween phase of her life, and she knows that she's not a child anymore, but she doesn't quite seem to be a grown-up either. So she feels pretty stuck in the middle. But she's a sweet, thoughtful child, and she has a soft, empathetic nature, and she's really the connection between Sumaya and Khadija, although she mostly sits and listens to them argue about small things, right? So there's actually a passage about the kind of arguments they had, and I have to share this with you because it really made me laugh, right? So let me start it here, right? So it's Khadija and Sumaya are sitting in the kitchen, and this particular chapter is written from Anisa's point of view. So Sumaya tore open the soft cardamom shells with her nails and emptied the tiny squashed black seeds into the large silver dish set between them. She leaned over to peer into the dish and sighed. Ma, this is going to take forever. How do I do it all the time? Khadija paused from shelling for a moment. You get used to it. No ways, not me, Sumaya said. Maybe you can do it, but I just don't have the time to sit and clean seeds. I also don't have time, Khadija spat back, but I try. She continued shelling and then suddenly paused. Wait, what you mean you don't have time to clean? How you make all your dana, jeera and elaichi powders for cooking? Sumaya paused guiltily. She cleared her throat. Well, I just buy mine from Habib's, she said quickly. What? Khadija looked outraged. Sis, you buy it? And from there? You know how dirty they are. Pagal hai. What, ma, you buy your jeera from there? My whole jeera, not the powdered one. And you know how much dirt comes out from the whole one when I clean it? It's so filthy. You think they clean it before they grind it for you? Ha! They must be grinding all the branches, stones, leaves, and mice's goo. She began to clean the seeds with increasing agitation. You saw how dirty their shelves is. They don't even sweep the floor. They even keep their chili powder open the whole night. The whole night! She threw one hand up in the air to emphasize her point and scattered elaichi seeds onto the floor. You think they're going to clean it for you? What? What goes inside those powdered ones and you still pay for it? Paying good money for kachra. And me? She said as if someone had just asked her. I'll never eat it. She turned around and called Anisa through the doorway. You heard that, Anisa? You eating rat shit at home. So, I mean, really the exaggeration of the whole conversation, but it's not exaggerated. This is real. This just really made me laugh because honestly, it's so typical of older Indian women who are they just cannot believe that younger people buy their spices. How can you do that? They don't clean it the way I clean it, and they don't roast it the way we would roast it, It's just I could just hear like my grandmother's voice in my ears at this point, like telling my mother that she must clean and roast her own jeera. Jeera is cumin, elaichi is cardamom, and dana is coriander, right? So it was hilarious. And, it was passages like this that really made me feel nostalgic, for my childhood, because these are conversations that we've heard. We've heard these. And I'm imagining that Shubnum Khan has heard them as well. So Anisa's whole aim in the book is to find out what happened to her father. Her mother told her that he is dead, but she knows that he isn't. And just, the magnitude of this lie was for me so shocking and something that is bound to come back to bite you, and it naturally caused a rift between mother and daughter, because I don't see how you can tell your child such a big lie. I mean, wow. So Anisa is eventually provoked by this really interfering auntie. And I mean, I think that we all know one of those aunties in our lives. And this lady actually wants to get back at Sumaya for some perceived trivial slight when Sumaya was a child, and she unfortunately gives Anisa the speculated facts rather than, the actual series of events. So this, of course, leads to a huge blowout between mother and daughter, and the rift between them deepens. There's something interesting also, though, like sweet about Anissa's character for me, particularly in that she wonders if she will ever change, right? So this is also an excerpt from the book, also from Anissa's point of view. People said, "Don't change, Anissa. Stay as sweet as you are." But what if she changed and couldn't help it? Then she thought, no, she would never change her personality. She would never betray her now self. Never. But she became worried that she might change without knowing. What if change crept up on her like a shadow that she didn't know was there until it was upon her? Or what if it happened slowly? Little things she wouldn't realize until she had changed too much. Then her future self would betray her now self. She tried to remember if she was the same person she was 2 years ago. And what if she changed for the better? Then what? I felt like this was such a sweet thing. And being a mother, I've also wondered, when my daughter will go through that change that essentially means the loss of their childhood innocence. And like Anissa said, it doesn't have to be a single event that changes you. It could happen slowly over a period of time where it's a lot of little things that eventually, build up and you realize that you're not the same person that you used to be. So when they start, understanding the hypocrisies and the double standards of the world, especially being a girl. And I think in Anissa's case, though, everything changed when the auntie told her what she thought had happened between Anissa's parents. So Anissa says she felt old. A furious anger tinged with sadness overcame her like flames licking a block of ice. So this book, Onion Tears, moves through the past and the present. And eventually we find out what actually happened between Sumaya and her husband and what her dark days were like and what brought her out of it. So sweetly enough, it was actually Anissa who brought her out of it, which I thought was just lovely. So at the point where we find out what happens, Anissa's father had already been absent from her life for 9 years. The break happened when she was 2 years old. So over this time, he made one attempt to see her. And I think that really hurts Anissa, and then blaming her mother was obviously just an easier way for her to deal with it because she had someone physical in front of her to hate and rage at, whereas her father wasn't there. So in the final chapters, Khadija and Anissa are the victims of a violent crime. And it was this incident that finally brings the family together. So it's really tragic that it had to happen, but it was also heartwarming in a way. So Khadija finally confronts her loneliness. Sumaya realizes that Anissa needs her father in her life, regardless of how she feels towards him. And Anissa, I think, eventually gets to end a particular chapter in her life and tentatively start a new one. So this book, it infuriated me because of the stereotypes, but it also made me laugh because of the stereotypes, because they're so accurate, right? Especially the character of Farida Khala, because I think that there is a Farida Khala in every family, right? Maybe not her in her entirety, but definitely certain aspects of her. And like maybe that character would be spread across several women in your family, but all of us know a Farida Khala, right? But the book also made me nostalgic for the days when I was young and playing with the neighborhood kids outside my granny's house. And so the book mentions that the women are Muslim, but honestly, I can't say that it has much bearing on the story as it progresses. It's more the culture, the Indian culture, that has an impact on their lives rather than the Islamic religion. And the behavior, and this of course influences the behavior of the main characters and some of the supporting ones as well. So the thing about Indians and their culture is that they hold on to it so tightly that eventually they can't distinguish between culture and religion. And this is where the trouble starts. This is something that I realized, way into my adulthood, to be honest, that we eventually confuse culture and religion, and we need to keep them separate. Because we tend to judge people based on their adherence to culture rather than adherence to religion. And cultural norms are a huge contributor to gender roles, where women have taken on the role of the domestic. They're made to keep house and raise children, while men go out and work and do pretty much nothing else. The concept of living with your parents until you're married, even if you're 40 years and plus, and then the concept again of living with your in-laws after you get married. So these are not necessarily healthy practices, and even though they cause a lot of problems, and people know they cause problems, we still continue to do it. But I think that people maybe hold on to their cultural and traditional practices so strongly because it gives them some kind of a connection to their homeland and prevents them from feeling completely adrift in a country that maybe never really felt like home for them, right? So Khadija says in the book often that she doesn't know what her father was thinking bringing them to South Africa, and they would have been better off with their own people. So she really misses India, and on the one trip that her brother takes her on, she really revels in the whole experience. But I think that, as we're going down the generations now, it would be interesting to see which cultural and traditional practices are kept and then which are discarded now by the subsequent generations. So there's something that Sumaya says to her mother at the end of the book, which I don't necessarily agree with, right? And this is a topic that is also so rife amongst Indians, okay. So she tells her mother that she should have listened to her because children are supposed to listen to their mothers. Which, okay, I'm not going to contest that one because, I'm a mother and I'm going to tell my daughter that children have to listen to their mothers. But that doesn't mean that your mother is always right? I mean, she's also a human and humans are subject to mistakes. So, yes, listen to her, but it doesn't mean that she's always right and it doesn't mean that she always knows best, okay? But anyway, so Shumaya goes on to say that maybe she should have actually studied medicine because her mother had told her to and her life would have been better. So that becoming a doctor means being guaranteed a good life is one of these myths that Indians perpetuate generation after generation. And that if you don't become a doctor, you are somehow a failure at life and you will never be totally happy. You will never make enough money, right? And if you can't be a doctor, then you should at least marry a doctor because then that makes you successful by association. So this can actually go to the point of forcing kids who don't want to become doctors to pursue the path anyway. And can you imagine being treated by a doctor like that? By someone who doesn't really want to be a doctor, who maybe skated by on, a just pass mark. And I know they have terrible bedside manners and I don't know if you want to question their diagnoses or not, but generally the bedside manners leave something to be desired. So I personally feel that your life is ultimately what you make of it. And I don't feel that there is a single decision that could decide the course of the rest of your life. It is a collection of decisions. And happiness and success also don't look the same to everyone. And I think that Sumaya really says it perfectly at the end. There were many different trains in life, not one. So I really enjoyed this book and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. While the stereotypes mentioned in this book are not exclusive to Indians or Muslims or any particular group, I felt that there is still something unique about this book in that it comes from the South African perspective and that it was so personal for me in particular. Like I said, I could relate to a lot of the conversations that were going on there. Because they were so much part of my childhood. So just some stats about the book. The book's about 286 pages long. It's actually really quite a quick read with a 3.87 rating on Goodreads. So I'm going to tell you that I'm generally a bit of a snob when it comes to books because I will check the Goodreads rating and if it's rated less than 4, I won't often pick up the book. But because Shubnum Khan is South African, she's female, she's Muslim, and she's Indian. Honestly, that's why I picked the book up because I thought that maybe this could be something that I could relate to. And even the thing about Sumaya trying to reconcile her South African and Indian identities, that was also something that really spoke to me. So the book was published in 2011 by Pan Macmillan South Africa. It's still available at all major bookstores. You can hear that it's quite old by now though. So I got my copy from Exclusive Books. It was less than 200 Rand. I actually can't remember how much I paid for it. But just so you know, there are some trigger warnings for this book. One of them is suicide and another one is domestic abuse and also, of course, mental illness. So just before, you decide if you want to pick it up or not, just know that there are some trigger warnings for trauma in this book. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And until next time, this is Books and Mortar with me, Razia, your host, where we talk about the books that build us. Bye.